Disher, D-I-S-H-E-R, Chief of Police, KISD Police Department.
So if you want to give them a brief overview of what they witnessed today.
Sure. So what we've been doing all this week, we went through 40 hours of active shooter training, and what that is where they have been given several different scenarios this week to go through to how to eliminate a threat, and then we also do evacuation training with them and triage. This was something that's been in place for quite a while. We had been looking at trying to do some type of simulation training outside of the alert and other types of active shooter training that we've done with other departments. We wanted something that was internal and in-house that we could do. So back in March, we actually requested funding for assimilation weapons, and in April purchased those weapons after it was approved in March, and had that put in place so that we could get that active training here. We use different schools within the building and within the district. One of those is Bel Air here today. What we're looking forward to doing in the future is on professional development days when we have no students in the buildings, going and using different various campuses throughout the district, because we want them to become familiar with the different campuses, because everything is a little bit different, has different layouts.
Do you want to talk about the ability for us to have, we have dogs, but obviously we didn't bring the dog in today, and why that was, because he is out there.
Right, so we have two dogs. One of the dogs that we'll have, and all of our officers went through this training this week except for two. One is at K9 training this week with a weapons detection dog that we'll be implementing this year. The other one's on some military service and military commitment that he already had. But the training will sometimes probably in the future include the weapons dog as well, so that we get that familiarity.
Have questions?
Seeing as how you've had quite a lengthy, career as an officer, given the beginning to now, would you have ever thought that a training like this was needed in a school setting? Is it hard to swallow?
It is, because you have to remember I started in October of 1980, right? So that makes me been around for a little while. So we didn't have to worry about that back then, right? Even when I went to school, we talk about kids had shotguns and rifles in the back of their truck and left them unlocked, and at the end of the day, they might go hunting at the end of the day. But we've transitioned into a society now where we have to have police officers in school, and then we also have had active shooter situations where we now have to be able to respond and make sure that our people are trained properly, and that they get all of the training as good as possible so that they can react and be able to keep our schools safe.
A lot of the footage from, specifically from Uvalde is public knowledge now. A lot of people have seen it, civilian or, law enforcement. Is there any sort of implementation of, things that you've taken away from seeing that video? Is that implemented into this training in any way, or are there things that you've learned from seeing that footage that you've now, instilled in your force here?
Sure, and we've seen some of that footage as well, right? So we use some of those scenarios, and it's not just Uvalde, Parkland, Santa Fe. We had a lot of our officers go to the Santa Fe briefing a few years ago. A few went this week when Deputy Chief Ford was there from Salado. What may have happened at Sandy Hook, because they're all a little bit different, right? It's never the same. Columbine wasn't the same as well. So we try to take that, and one of the things that we got as well is there's some law enforcement reports that are law enforcement sensitive that came to us just directly because they can't go out to the public, that deal with Uvalde, and we're using that as a training tool with our supervisors and then down to our officers as well. Not as a gotcha kind of thing, but to learn from it, what can we do to make sure that we respond correctly.
Now, how frequently are the KISD Police Department will be doing a training like this to make sure everyone is? This is going to be a mandatory training from now on?
So it's mandatory for everybody that's here. Like I said, the only two that weren't able to do it's because of the one in the canine training and the military commitment. But we're looking at doing this every professional development that we have, and then doing it again in the summertime, trying to keep them. It's kind of like playing golf, right? If you don't play golf enough, you're just okay. So we want to make sure that they train as much as possible, so that it becomes muscle memory for them, and it's just automatic on how they need to respond in these situations.
You rattle off a lot of cities, a lot of towns, a lot of different schools and situations like that. As a police officer, I mean, how does, is there sort of an underlying desire that maybe, you know, if lawmakers get involved and maybe, you know, do their parts of that? Obviously, you're going to do what you need to do to prevent these types of things and get involved when you need to use this training. But I mean, is there any sort of desire to kind of, you know, shrink that list so that 20, 30 years from now, you don't have as many schools to recount that, you know, situations like this have happened?
Sure, and that's something that we look at too. You try to reach out to the legislatures and try and let them know of some things that you see. We've had some legislators that have reached out to us to get some information and thoughts so that they can go back and maybe try to do some things with the laws that we already have. But it's always going to be a continuous work in progress, right? As you try to improve and make it safe and hopefully get to a situation where we don't have to worry about this again. Unfortunately, that's the worst thing that can happen in our environment is that we have an active school shooter, and we don't ever want to not be prepared for that. So y'all ready? So the scenario, each scenario is different every time they go through. So we change it each and every time so the officers can learn doing 1-man, 2-man, and 3. What you saw today was a 2-man unit and a 1-man unit that responded. They came into the building. The initial call that came in was that we had a shooter on the playground. And so when they got here, there was someone outside that let them know that the shooter had made entry into the building. And so as they're coming down the hallway, once they hear the shots fired, that's their trigger point to move forward towards the shots that are being fired to eliminate the threat. And then you saw them come into the classroom and then eliminate the threat, secure everyone that's in there, and then start doing the triage and notification to the comm center and other units that are coming, right, so that they know where you are.
Is there a bit of difficulty in trying to, you know, coach up some pointers and something like this? Because as you were saying, you know, every situation's different.
Right.
So, you know, how do you know whenever something may have worked or where we can improve on? Is there something difficult to that?
It is difficult, but what we do here, and I think you saw that when you were watching them come down the hallway, we've got observers that come with them. And so after each scenario, when we clear and say that we've cleared, we debrief with the officers right at that time, so that they can see what worked well, what we need to improve on, whether it's communication, how we entered the room dynamically or not. And then we also have we still got the cameras in these buildings. So we go back and we will do an after action with the officers then as a training type tool. A lot of times we'll follow the officers in with the observers and they can video from their phones how they entered the room, what transpired in the room, so that we can use that either right away as a debrief with them, so that they can improve for next time, or use it in the future as well for future trainings.
And just so I'm clear, was this particular exercise, this one of the first times y'all done it like this, or is this something that y'all done before, kind of worked through?
So we've been through, all of our officers had to go through the 8 hours of active shooter that's required by the state, and it's similar training to this. It has a active shooter and stop the bleed component, because you know they've talked about that, right? Because most of the time people die from bleeding out and not from the actual shot. And then most of our officers have been through 16 hours of alert, 24 hours of a race. We had 6 officers just go through that a couple of weeks ago, all in 1 week. We've had officers that have went through 60 hours of SWAT or have been SWAT trained. And so it's something that we've done tabletops as well, which do actually work well, because you can think through the process. So we're always trying to get them through as much active shooter training above what is really required by the state, because like I said, we want them to be as well trained as possible. You know, we talked last couple forums, and one of our officers has this motto of "you fight like you train." So if we train the right way, then they'll fight the right way when they go into the situation.
Is this the only variation of this type of training that you have? You know, in this exact scenario where you have, you know, this setup and everything, or are there other setups where maybe, you know, you'll be in a different part of a building and things like that, or maybe instead of 1 active shooter, maybe there's 2 or 3, something like that? Are there different variations of it?
So before y'all got here, we used a 2 active shooter scenario before that. Just so happened that the active shooter was in the area that y'all were sitting in. So, okay, because it's an adjoining classroom, right? So we use multiple shooter situations. We work on their exterior approach to the building, whether you have one outside or not, because you could have an exterior shooter. We put them in different areas where you may, I think y'all saw some of the chalk sleeve marks as you're shooting at people. You may have seen those in the classrooms or in the hallways. We have it where the shooter may start firing at them from the hallway, and they've got to figure out how to approach here. So we go through different scenarios each and every time to try and equip them with as many things as we can. So it changes each and every time they come through, so that as creative as we can get on what a shooter may do, we try to put them in those situations and run them through.